Hello, and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. My guest today is an entrepreneur, an endurance athlete, and a father of three and soon to be four. Kyle Sanders challenges you to live a fulfilled life by embodying your core values. He's a financial consultant and has been for 2 decades, leading families to transfer their true worth, to really understand what they value, and to bring that to the next generation. See, he believes that life changing money doesn't actually exist. It's wealth that can accelerate the direction that you want to take in life. So he's the host of the Legacy on Purpose podcast, and he interviews world class athletes, leaders, authors, TEDx speakers. He interviewed me. He interviews people who are living their life on purpose by grounding their decisions in their values. So you're going to see this as a theme throughout, talking about values and what that means in terms of the life that you want to lead. Kaya believes who you are anywhere is who you are everywhere. And we're going to get a little bit into that today. His lead values are agency, discipline, and forgiveness. He helps you identify your values and use them to maximize your impact in the world. So, Kyle, welcome to Big Talk.
Thank you so much. It's such a joy to see you. I saw you on my schedule. I saw that this was scheduled for today, and I jumped out of bed to have this conversation with you. I like you. I don't the barbecue and the service conversations don't light me up. So I just to dive in and to get deep with you. Thank you so much for just I know what's going to be a joyful moment of my day and my week for that for sure.
Oh, well, that's so incredible. I told my kids, they asked me, who I'm interviewing, every week. And I told them I was interviewing you. And they were like, well, who's that guy? And I said, remember the guy who sent you the gummy bears? So after I was on your podcast, you sent us a care package. It was like
Yes.
Indiana's best care package. And I have to say, the gummy bears that were in that package were so good. They literally, like on the outside of the package, it says the world's best gummy bears. And I was like, I've eaten a gummy bear or two in my life. Let's see. And then I ate one. I was like, holy shit, this is really good. In fact, it's so good that they have now become our stocking stuffers. I stuffed all the kids' stockings this year with those, and my husband's with those gummy bears because they were amazing. So thank you for introducing us to Indiana and the world's best gummy bears.
Yeah, yeah. Of all the things for Indiana to be known for, uh, you
Larry
know,
Bird, famous
Larry
Celtic.
Bird,
Come on, give it
you
up,
know,
Boston.
it's interesting. Like I didn't grow up in this state, and my wife is a huge basketball fan. I mean, just over the top basketball fan. I know little of the game, right? Which is just so it's been an interesting thing where people they associate the state that I live in with basketball and auto racing, and I don't really care about either one of them. What my wife can oh man, she can have some amazing conversations. So, yeah, people love Larry Bird. They love the Indy 500. Not Kyle, but that's okay.
That's all right. That's all right. So let's talk about Kyle. So your values, I mean, they're interesting, right? I'm interested in agency. I think agency is huge. It is super important. Discipline. The other day I was asked whether I believe in motivation or discipline more. I was like, discipline every day of the week.
Every day.
I want to start with forgiveness.
Yes.
How did you come to this as one of your core values?
Yeah, yeah. So, gosh, that's a deep conversation,
Big
and
talk,
we
baby.
can go as deep as you want to go. So, when I was 2.5 years old, my grandfather was murdered, and he was some men broke into his home, this farm in the middle of nowhere, Ohio, stole one of his guns, and shot him, killed him on his own property. And this is 1982, summer 1982. There's no CSI. There's none of that, right? There's none of the DNA stuff. And so they do polygraph testing with most of my family because the natural thought is, this was on his own property and all these things. It had to have been a family member because there was no real obvious other signs.
They knew where the gun was.
They knew where the gun was, all those things, right? So they passed, nobody. And so this case sits cold until I'm in the 5th grade. And I come home and my parents share with me the news that they've arrested the man. There's been a crack in the case. This one person never gave it up. And so now these people are going to go to trial. And so in the 5th grade, I sat in the trial for one of the men who killed my grandfather and listened to the testimony, listened to all these. Like, I'm watching Little the House on the Prairie still, right? My parents are letting me watch PG movies, maybe, right? And because of just this is all encompassing my entire family. I'm there sitting in the courtroom watching this unfold, hearing details that if it was in a movie, my mom and dad would not have let me to watch it, but they had no other choice. So I go through all this and experience this, and I had thoughts and feelings that you would expect a person would have, like hate and anger and anxiety through the roof. I couldn't sleep well, afraid of the dark, all these things, right? That you would think would come from a trauma of this level. And then in the eighth grade, I'm in this. So I fast forward and I'm given that we can go deeper if we want to. But in the eighth grade, I sat in a church camp in Montreat, North Carolina, which is where Billy Graham has a conference center and spoke, and the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King spoke here. And I mean, it's hallowed ground by great people who spoke freedom and justice and love in this world. I sat there, and this minister spoke about the power of forgiveness and the concept through a different filter than most people really don't think about it. It is a really bastardized word in our English language. So I'm going to talk about that. And so he shares the idea, this concept of forgiving others, not just asking forgiveness for the things we have done, but forgiving others for the things they've done. And so they had counselors in the back. This guy's like, sticking a stick in the hornet's nest. I think that they knew there were some people that probably gone through abuse or who knows what others were struggling with. I only knew my own struggle at that moment. So I went to the back and I sat down with this woman, and we talked about my story like I'm sharing with you, and how I felt and how I was feeling. And then I held her hand. She was this larger than life Southern African American woman. She was just beautiful in her presence. And we held hands and we prayed for the forgiveness of the people who killed my grandfather. And I can share with you that my life looks very, very different today had I held that inside all these years. Way different. And so for me, one of the key attributes of forgiveness and what I learned in that moment that is carried forth to me in so many ways is that forgiveness is an inside job. You see, these people don't know that I did this. They have no idea. I didn't call them and tell them that I forgave them. I didn't have a dialogue with them to say, hey, I want to let you know. It was an inside job. I let go of the hate. I let go of the anger. And I use those words intentionally. I let go of them. I didn't. And through that, I was able to hold on to something else, which is love and peace. And for so many people, the thing that holds them back is so you can't have with yourself, which you won't give to somebody else, and to your in the reverse the same. And so what I learned in that process deeply and it's the gift I try to and want to give to others is that forgiveness, forgiving our own transgressions, our own mistakes, our own frailties, our own pieces. Like, I imagine if I had the opportunity to sit down with the men who made that decision in the summer of 1982 and ask them if they reflect on that decision to be a good one, they would tell me that it was not, right? Is that none of us, no matter how egregious the decision was, none of us are the worst thing we've ever done. And by knowing and understanding that, I'm able to allow myself to push further, to be okay and at the brink of failure and even fail sometimes, because I know what true forgiveness is and I'm able to give it to myself as well.
There are so many things in that story that I wanna unpack. I'm not even sure where to begin, but
Okay, start wherever it feels comfortable.
that is a stunning story, and you tell it so beautifully, and I wanna honor that because, you said at one point, I sat in the back of the room and I told this woman the story much in the same way that I'm telling it to you now, and my guess is that's probably not true, right?
No, it's probably
That
not true.
it has probably taken you decades to be able to tell the story in a way that you tell it now with emotion and honesty and warmth and wisdom because, I mean, I don't know what you were like in 5th grade, but I definitely wasn't like that in 5th grade or 8th grade or even, when I was 40, right? So
Yeah.
I wanna honor that, how far you've come. Over the summer, I stopped sleeping, like a lot of us, the pandemic, right? Just
Mhm.
stress and all the rest.
Yes.
And I went to go get professional help because I was like, I think I'm breaking my brain. Like I can't remember my name. I can't remember numbers. I can't remember the garage code or my ATM pin number. Like it's just nothing was sticking in my brain.
Mhm.
And I talked a lot about my anger about what was happening in the world and people who weren't wearing masks or going on spring break or gathering in crowds and our political lack of political leadership and how angry I was. And the psychiatrist that I was talking to was like, he said something that I thought was such a beautiful thing. I mean, you say forgiveness is an inside job. He said, you can let go of your hate and your anger towards other people without ever actually having to have a conversation with them. He said,
Yes.
"Forgiveness is not couples therapy." And I
It's
was like,
not. It's
"That
not.
is such a great line." But so you said, I needed to let go of the hate and the anger so that I could make room for the love and the forgiveness. It did it have to be one before the other, or were you able to find the love and forgiveness to push the anger out? I mean, how does one let go of hatred and anger?
Yeah, yeah, to me, this may not be true for everyone, so I'll speak to my is that there is a lens of perspective that had to shift, right? So you one of the things that is so challenging in forgiveness is number one, I want to share with you. It's not it like I forgave them many, many times since then as well. All right. So you're right. That's not exactly how that played. So thanks for calling my crap on that. I was a pretty emotional hot mess in the back of that church,
I mean,
right? There was some
I would have been.
I
I was
was emotional hot
I was
mess, right? I
emotional
mean,
hearing you tell the story.
yeah, I know. It was a hot mess of a moment, right? I choose to reflect on that moment how I felt more about on the back end than
Mm,
during it. Because I've never felt lighter, I guess is the best descriptor of that.
yeah.
But forgiveness sometimes is a journey. There's moments like when I started having kids and I don't know how long my grandfather would have lived naturally, had that been an opportunity, but he certainly didn't get to meet any of my kids, right? And so I had those moments in my wedding as I'm seeing, my wife of all of her grandparents there and he's not there, right? So like I've had those moments and I have to come back to it. It's not as though this moment hasn't been part of my life or just forgiveness and it's gone. But I speak about it that way in terms of letting go is because there's an energy to that process is that if you think about if you try to hold water, how tight you must grip and but you'll never hold it. But if you truly release your hands, that you can hold as much as you need to drink. And once you let that energy go, that energy that we're holding on to something so tightly, then it gives you the strength to grab a hold of something else. And so to me, yes, I think you have to forgive first because there's so much energy of our life force tied up in hate and anger that you have nothing left to grab a hold of anything else.
Was
So,
was the person that they arrested, was he somebody known to your grandfather in the end?
yeah, that's where the story gets really interesting, and my family's backstory gets really interesting. So, my mother's father had nearly 1,000 acres of farmland over in Ohio. So he had done well, and so the guy was a real estate developer, um, within like they knew one another, one of the people. Beyond that, we don't know much. We don't know why. We don't know what the triggers. We don't know what my grandfather knew. We don't. There's been an enormous amount of speculation of what may have unfolded. Um, but I've chosen personally to not go there. I've had family members want to, you know, wrap me and bring me into those conversations. But the end of the story is these group of men made a decision, and to me, that decision was theirs, and it brings me no peace, and it brings me no tranquility, and it brings me no further in this journey to know their justification because to me there is none. There is none. So it wouldn't matter to me, right?
Yeah.
But we don't really know why or any of their perspective and why they made the choice they made.
Yeah, I ask people that all the time when they're like, "Well, I just wanna get closure." And I'm like, "Well, what is closure? Like, is there something that you're gonna hear that's gonna make you feel
No,
better? Is there a
no,
reaction that somebody's gonna have that's gonna make you feel better? Is there something that they're gonna do that's gonna help you move further along in your processing?"
great
Like you said,
questions.
it has to be, and, the answer to that is always, I don't I mean, I like, because, and I think a lot of times in whether it's a trauma or just like a breakup or something, we have this idea that somebody's going to say something that we're going to be like, okay, now I feel better about it, like it's all you, it wasn't me, like it's whatever the thing was. And I think a lot of times we don't realize that just hurt people just do hurt people, right? Emotional people do emotional things. And there's not like, we search for logic and there is none. And then we act out and try to extract a reaction out of somebody that's not necessarily the reaction we want. And it doesn't really help. And so it's really like, what do you need? What do you need to have? What do you need to know? How do you need to feel? And that the ability to protect yourself from the conjecture and the gossip and the the treasure hunting that's going on that's really remarkable.
Yeah, well described. Yeah. So people often want to know all the details, right? I mean, I was being interviewed for a board position for a nonprofit that dealt with kids dealing with grief.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to name it because this, one person isn't representation of the organization, but they said, well, what do you know about childhood grief? And I share the story. Like
Yeah,
I know a fair share. I know a fair share. Right. And so the immediate jump is to the true crime story, kind of let me know all the gory details, what happened. And
right.
it's just not like, I don't really have space in my life for that. Like, I'm not here to entertain you with my life story. If you can gain wisdom from what I have journeyed through, that maybe I, my middle of the story is your beginning. And because I'm in the middle, I can serve your beginning and help you navigate something that seems extraordinarily difficult. And I will share my story to serve you out of a place of love and gratitude for being where I am and no longer being where you are. Right.
So forgiveness is one of your core values. There's also agency and discipline, and I'm hearing a lot of agency and discipline in how you deal with forgiveness as well.
Yeah, it's recognizing and gosh, I'm gonna quote Will Smith of all the people, right?
Let's get jiggy with it, man.
But it's not my fault, but it's my responsibility,
Mm,
right? I'm a firm believer that it's far better to come from a healthy family than a wealthy family, and that it is my responsibility as a father and as a husband to navigate through these things in a way that provides myself the opportunity to model to my children what a healthy person looks like. And in absence of learning to forgive, then there's no way that's a possibility for me. And so, yeah, it is my responsibility. And there's been a lot of things in my life, in my story, in my journey. That's just the tip of the iceberg, quite candidly, as crazy as it may sound, um, that have required forgiveness. And that has been one of the greatest gifts. We just had a client whose husband passed away, 24 years of marriage, and left all of the money to the kids. She got almost nothing. And angry as angry can be, as you can imagine, right? It was a second marriage. And she's going, he changed the will and didn't tell me.
mm.
Right. And I'd be hot as a pistol. I'd be hot.
I'd
I'd be so
I'd kill 'em all
angry.
over again.
Yeah. Like, I'm like, are you exactly right? Like, I'm to take this guy up. Right.
Take it
Like,
off
you
and
think
kill
you're
him.
dead now? Give me a minute. Right. And so the gift of understanding forgiveness is that we've all been hurt. It's a human connection.
Yeah.
It's a human connection. We've all been hurt in some ways. My story, the only difference between my story and whomever's listening to this and their story of what they've gone through is just the details, right? But the gift is no different. And so we've all had that moment. And so one of the things that I'm so grateful for is that I've had the blessing of showing up so many times in people's lives where forgiveness is the key they need to unlock the door to peace. And I can just share with them very gently what that has meant to me and what it potentially might mean to them. And so, yeah, agency is a huge piece of this because once you take responsibility for how you're dealing with something that has happened that maybe you didn't invite into your life, once you can hold on to that, truly hold on to that, then you can serve another person with it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's that quote that's, attributed to Buddha, which is probably not real because 80% of those quotes are not, but something like holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting your enemy to die.
Yes. Yeah, I've seen that attributed to a ton of people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's
Uh,
attributed to Will Smith.
yeah. From this point forward, any quote that I cannot think of, we're giving
Will
Will
Smith.
Smith the credit.
I mean, why not, right?
I mean, he's one of my favorite actors, so why not? Yeah, exactly. But here's a deeper piece of that. So that's to me, that's I know you don't like small talk. To me, that's really surface, right?
Yes.
Like the truth is, right, is that And I used to hear that I listened to the late Dr. Wayne Dyer a lot in this early part of my journey of becoming the person that's actually speaking to you today, right? Is that there's a gentleness to this process, right? So I'm completely okay. So when I had that interview for that board of directors and the person grilled me about my story about my grandfather, the next morning while showering, I cried my eyes out.
Mm,
And I hadn't cried about the death of my grandfather in I don't know how long, right? But they stirred in something inside of me that I didn't realize was still there. And the fact that this person was willing to just treat me so inhumanely bothered me as well.
yes.
So there was anger and there was emotions and there was all these things, right? I don't mean to suggest in any sense that like forgiveness is something that, suddenly magically makes the pain go away. It doesn't. It certainly does not for anything that one is unfolded. It just gives you something where it's easier to navigate the pain that you might be experiencing for whatever you went through. It's a tool, and it's one of the most powerful tools in my perspective to navigate the pain that we all have as part of the human condition and the journey that we're all under. And so without it, you have no chance to deal with what we are experiencing at all. You have no chance at all, in my opinion, right? With it, you have a shot. And I would argue in some relationships in our life, I believe in something called spontaneous radical forgiveness. So I suspect that you and your husband never argue. You have a perfect marriage and there's never discourse. And, he recognizes your brilliance and he's wise enough after all these years to just yield to your wisdom at a moment's notice.
Let's go with yes.
Okay. Okay. So in other people's marriages, right? But certainly not yours and certainly not mine because I do the same thing for my beautiful bride is there's discourse. And sometimes that discourse, we have a different perspective, right? And the way we have that perspective can progress to a place where um, we don't honor one another as humans. We speak unkindly. We are not, we just don't interact in a way that feels authentic and true. And it can ruin a whole day.
Mhm.
We've all had those arguments with somebody we love that's last, maybe it's 8 hours a day, the weekend. Well, this is a fast ride through life,
Yeah.
right? And I don't know a single person when they're 86 years old sits back and goes, you know what? One of my best choices was sitting and arguing over my wife who takes out the garbage this week,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so I think one of the pieces that I've also learned is that for the small things in life, I just forgive you right away. You don't even have to say anything, right? I'm not going to hold on to this because this is not enough for me to end the relationship. All right. I'm going to forgive you here in a little bit. So instead of wasting all this time being angry, when I have so little with the person, the people we love, why don't just forgive them now? If you're going to forgive them anyways, well, they need to go do all these things. Well, forgiveness is an inside job. The people who came to my grandfather have never done anything to earn their forgiveness. So why am I putting my wife through these paces if I won't even make these people go through their paces?
Mm.
So why not just forgive them now, immediately, and
So,
skip
is
all
there
that?
some moment though where the other person's like, "Well, I don't want you to forgive me. I wasn't wrong." Like, how does that work?
So one of my hot buttons, I think they use the word triggers, right? Is when I'm in one of these discussions and someone says to me, "You're right." I know I wouldn't be having this conversation with you if I didn't think I was right. So don't misunderstand me. Like as I share these things, like I know exactly what you're talking about. Like I'm one of those people, like where I may mess up, right? And I've messed up, but I think I'm right.
Yeah.
And someone's like, "Well, I forgive you." I really think sometimes it's the best thing to do is just to shut your mouth, right? To
Yeah.
recognize that person thinks that they were right in the scenario, love and forgive them and move on. I think your therapist hit the nail right absolutely on the head,
Yeah.
or right? Is that sometimes the worst thing you can do is to sit down and have a conversation about forgiveness with the person because the person's probably sitting there going, I don't know what you're forgiving me for. You're
Right.
really grinding an axe here versus so
Gets
no,
worse.
yeah, you can make it worse for
You
sure.
can make for sure you can make it worse. Yeah. When my kids were little, we were part of a whole group of like a parents group and lots of kids running around. And there was this one kid who was always super stubborn. Like he wanted to play with the dump truck in the sandbox that he wanted to play with, and like nobody else could have that sandbox. And I remember him coming over to his mom one day, like holding this the I don't know, the backhoe or something in his hands, and he was like, "Yeah, I have the dump truck," and he was so upset. And I was supposed to be my turn, and I remember the mother looking at this kid and saying, "Well, do you want to be right or do you want to have friends?"
Mm.
And he looked her dead in the eye and he said, "I wanna be right." And she looked at me and I looked at her and we were like, "Yep, let's crack open the next bottle of wine." We're
Yeah, no
just
kidding. I wanna be right. Well, and
wanna be
The
right.
late Dr. Wayne Dyer would often say is it when you have a choice to be right or be kind, always choose to be kind,
Yeah.
you know? And it's that is easier word spoken than lived by. Um, but, I think my intentionality and what I'm sharing here, it's not about getting it perfect. It's just getting it better than you did yesterday.
Yes. So when you work with families and you talk to them about their values and how they wanna live their lives and what that means in terms of how they wanna manage their money and who do they wanna leave it to and what do they wanna leave it to and how do they wanna use it while they have it, how does that process unfold?
Yeah, I think one of the things that a lot of people don't take the time to understand is that, um, who you are, like these core values, manifest in the way you consume the resources that you have, no matter whether they're a lot of resources or less resources. And so, what we have dialogues around is a couple key areas, right? So, we have a lot of dialogue around charitable intent and the
Mhm,
power of multi generational charitable uh, and philanthropic endeavors. And so, we'll bring multiple generations in and put together a family philanthropic plan. And we'll talk about those core values of what we're trying to do in our community, in our churches, in our synagogues, in our mosques, in our places of worship and our places of gathering and in the broader global sense as well. And so the first thing that we begin to do is have these dialogues. So what are the areas in the world that you want to make better, that if you could with resources make a difference in. And so we begin to have those dialogues, and so generations can see in the future the grandma and grandpa or mom and dad or whomever was the original wealth creator in this family, can see that these people had something that they didn't pursue money and money alone.
mhm.
The majority of the time, wealth comes from an intentionality to make the world a better place, and everyone said, "Hey, that person's doing great work here. I want to be part of that. I want to experience that. I want to share that. I want to consume that." And so when there's an exchange of impact for financial resources, and so somebody in this family originally gathers wealth. And so the first one of the key things we do is we engage these multi-generational philanthropic conversations. The second is we give people space. We have different conversations. The extension of this podcast really came from taking what I do in the conference room and bringing it to a microphone, in a broader sense, is that the truth is that once we begin to look at ourselves and understand, okay, what are the values I care about the most? Well, those values are what's going to drive your decisions. And so one of the things we've observed and studied and researched a ton is that you can hand somebody an enormous amount of wealth. And if they're grounded in a certain core values, they'll go out and continue to do great things with that money.
Mhm.
If they are not, then they will go out and continue to do the things they were doing already, that it just accelerates the direction of their lives. And so one of the key areas we do is we have this conversation is if you are having a conversation with your grandchildren, let's fast forward this 20 years, and you're having a conversation with your grandchildren, and that grandchild is sharing a story with you. What story would make you the most proud based upon the values they're living, the decisions they're making? Like, what values do you want to make sure are part of your family story generations to come? So these are multiple year conversations. These aren't moments. Like, this isn't unfolding. So like for you, like it's you're a person who is very grounded to justice. You're somebody who's very grounded to liberty and freedom of choice for people regardless of sexual orientation, gender, anything, that all people should have. There are some values that you represent in this world, right? That if you were thinking about your sons 20 years from now and whether they're parents or choose not to be parents, whatever unfolds with them through that journey, but if you're looking at a future generation, I could say with confidence and with the gift of knowing you, that if your future grandchildren are sharing with you, hey, grandma, not to make you feel old with that word, but if they say with you, whatever descriptor they use, right, for you, they said, hey, I went out, like my local city was, making this decision against LGBTQ rights, or there was this, piece of legislation that made it harder for single mothers to come back into the workforce, or fill in the blank, right? And I was marching and I was getting petitions signed and I was fill in the blank. You would feel such joy to know that that part of you that tries to open doors for others was part of your grandchildren's lives as well.
Yeah.
That's what we try to help people understand.
That is such a great way to think about it. During the pandemic, we do a family meeting every weekend, and my kids are 16 and 18, so we I have to figure out like who's here, who's where on what day, and who's home and who's not, and who's making dinner, and like we're all there's so many moving parts. Uh, but the family meeting really started. We've been doing it for 5 years, and in the beginning, it was really about like who are we as a family, and what are the
Mm,
values we want to uphold as a family. And every week we'd pick a family value, and then we'd go into our airing of gratitudes about, who did something great that week, and thanking people for, like, hey, thanks for coming downstairs before I called you to help me make dinner. I really appreciated
love it.
that. Or the sort of like catching them being good type of thing, or,
Yes.
good job getting the A on the test that you studied so hard for, or whatever the thing might be. Then we do the logistics, and then we do our airing of grievances, and that's where shit gets real. But we always would have like one piece of sort of big business, and one of them during the pandemic was just talking about how privileged we are right now as a family, right? I had to sort of reinvent myself professionally, but neither my husband nor I lost our jobs. Our kids were able to, do school from home with great Wi-Fi and all the rest. And it wasn't. We were safe at home. Right. We weren't stuck at home. We weren't afraid. And we would watch the news every night and just hear these stories about so much loss, whether it was, actual, bodily life loss, or just the economic toll that this has been taking. And we just looked at each other at one family meeting, and we were like, this isn't okay. Like we need to, like, we haven't spent a dollar on vacation in a year. We could take that money and put it somewhere that actually matters, will make a difference for people. And it was a really interesting thing, because we asked our kids to do some thinking about what actually mattered to them, and then bring that to the next meeting to talk about some issues that they cared about. And then at the next meeting, we would do some research about some organizations that were doing work in that area. And then the next meeting, we sort of talked about budgeting out numbers and how much we wanted to give and what that would mean. And, how, what kind of a gift is too small of a gift? What is too big of a gift? What's the right size for an organization? And how do we know if it's actually working? Obviously, I have a background in nonprofit, so,
Yeah.
I know how to
You,
think
you
about
took a
impact for
different,
that.
you took a deeper dive on that conversation.
So we took a pretty deep dive, but it took a few meetings to actually get the values out, because we just asked them what mattered to them, but didn't have them visualize it in terms of, as you get older and as you see these values in the world and the people that you love living the values, how will it make you feel? And so the conversation almost felt forced and academic the way we did it. And I love the way you're thinking about it, because I'm sitting here thinking about my grandkids marching for things that matter to me. And I'm like, well, why didn't they call me to march with them?
All
I
right.
want to be with them.
Right. We do
It's,
family goals,
yeah.
and we do it through the filter of giving our kids a leg up on the competition. So we
Mm,
ask them, what do you want to learn? What do you want to experience? And how do you want to give?
mm,
Right. And so we do this in the beginning of the year. Like, what do you want to learn? What do you want to experience? Because I think so often in parents, we get tied up. Well, they're learning at school. No, 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 no. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff.
yeah.
Right. So, like, my kids wanted to learn to swim last year. They weren't very strong swimmers. Well, all the pools, everything was closed. So, again, privilege. We're sitting on the shores of Lake Michigan. I'm like, time to learn to swim, guys. Right. It's the goal. Right. And there are things they wanted to experience. And some of those couldn't happen. I want to experience a Green Bay Packer game with my kids in person. I didn't happen, right?
Right.
Just they started to open up. I wasn't going. I
Yeah.
was just no thanks, right? But the give piece is one of them, right? And having that dialogue, I took my two oldest down to a food bank, and we masked up and handed out food for an afternoon last year. And I think this is maybe the second time I've ever talked about it. because I didn't do it for that reason. There's no social media post that I made about it. It wasn't about that. I asked them to do two things. I said, I want you to pay attention to how people look, and I want you to pay attention to how people respond. Because one of the things we know is that minority families and lower socioeconomical families, but unfortunately often are individuals who are minorities, suffered more from the pandemic
Sure.
than
Yeah.
anyone else, right? And so I had a gut feel that a lot of the folks were going to be in that soup line were waiters and waitresses and individuals who are earning their living with a lot of the pieces that were dramatically impacted by the pandemic.
Yes.
And so, I wanted them to see people, like truly see people, right? And then I want you to see how they respond. And so I had a whole bunch of sack lunches made up by a restaurant that I know the owner is, trying to help them out. And so he made a whole bunch of sack lunches, and we're handing out sack lunches to these cars as they're waiting in line for a box of food. I just for hours for food.
Hmm.
And so we're walking around, and there's kids in these cars, and they're probably hungry. So we're handing out sandwiches and cookies and what have you. And so then we get back in the car after a few hours of doing this, right? So we're there from like 9 to 12:30 or what have you. And I said, Corey and William, what did you notice about people? And you know what they said to me? They all smiled at me. They're all happy to see me.
Hmm.
They're all thrilled, right? And so one of the things I wanted them to see by getting up close and personal and serving people is that the beauty in all humanity, even in their hardest and toughest moments, that an act of kindness can create a response of love and beauty.
I I am not a religious person. We talked about this a little bit before we started.
Yes. No, am I.
I put the ish in Jewish, I like to say, and I married a man who was raised Catholic, but who's pretty atheist at this point. And so we're not really raising our kids with any religion at all. And people are always like, "Well, what are you raising them to be?" And I'm like, "Good humans."
Yeah.
Period. That's it. Sort of do unto others. There, end of religion class, go play. Like that's pretty much it. But I've always been struck by that line there, but for the grace of God go I, right? Like at any moment life can change. There could be a catastrophe, an accident, a disaster, a diagnosis, something, and all of a sudden, and I think about this sometimes when I'm driving. If I'll see a kid on the side of the road or something and I like slow down. I'm like, what if I didn't see him? What if he ran into the street? What if I hit him? What if that was it? Like my story became manslaughter of a child as I'm driving. And I'm not this like crazy, neurotic, anxious person, but I think about that sometimes about how quickly life can change and you have no idea, right? You have no idea. You said earlier that you were at this camp in North Carolina and you have no idea what everybody else is going through. Like everybody in those cars might have been sitting in the same seat you were sitting in yesterday. You don't know, right? They're not charity cases. They're just
No, they're not.
human beings.
They're just people. They're just people. And, it's interesting you say the life can happen in a moment. Like my grandfather was weed eating a silo, lights out, over, game over, right? I hope he didn't have an argument with my grandmother before he went out to, but who knows, right? I had somebody say to me one time when I was younger, I'm still young, but younger than I am now, you still think you're invincible. And I had to kindly let them know how much horse manure they're full of. Just completely full of horse manure. Because, and I've talked to my cousins about this, is that none of us really went through that invincibility phase, because we like you go through that, lens changed forever. Like what you're talking about, like this understanding, it's the greatest gift we can give ourselves is to recognize, right? It's often said there's two stories in our life, right? And our life begins when we realize that someday it'll end,
Yes.
right? And I'm paraphrasing that pretty badly. Here's the
It's
reality.
another
Here's
Will
the
Smith
greatest
quote.
gift, right? Holy cow! Like you will there's this great video, Gary V. He goes, "Inspire me in 4 words. You will die soon." Like it's
Yes.
that simple, right?
Yes.
Like, and whether it's death, whether it's disability, whether it's poverty that puts you in a place where the privilege you have today is gone tomorrow. At some point, I will lose mobility. I will lose my money will not serve me in a way, won't be able to open the doors I wish I could open, right? Because I will not I will be in a fragile state. Like the poor person and the wealthy person in the nursing home, both of them don't want to be there,
Right.
right? It's totally irrelevant. At some point, your wealth will do you no good. And so the recognition and understanding to live from that place and to show up in people's life from that place changes a lot.
So what happens in your home? Like, do you put the cell phones down? Do you have dinner together? I feel like there must be like a hyper focus on being present. Now you have small kids, right? So like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's a
If I'm
whole
not
different story
hyper-present, they
than a 16 and
die.
18-year-old.
They die if I don't. Yeah, so I have an 8, a 6, a 2-year-old, and another one on the way. And as my half sister said so brilliantly to me when I shared we're having another one, she goes, "Will you please leave your poor wife alone?" I thought that was clever. So yeah, I mean, if I'm not hyper vigilant, my kids die.
Yeah,
But they're of that age, so but 100%. I think one of the things that parents right now, there's a number of things, but one of the things I think is really a gift from my endurance running and the endurance stuff I do is that I've gotten to where I can get and go to where I can go in that space by learning to be extraordinarily present in a moment. And that's transcended into relationships with me. And so, yeah, 100%. Like we have family dinner every single night together. It's because it's something I didn't experience as a kid. My father was an addict when I was younger, and as a result, like it just didn't like more time together was not a blessing during that journey in his life.
sure.
He's in
Yeah.
recovery, and I'm thankful for that. But more family time together was not a bonus, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, every night we sit down and we do a couple different things, depends on what window of life we're in. We pray together every night at dinner, and that prayer is often a prayer of gratitude. We just spent 40 days in gratitude alone, where we all would share something each night that we're grateful for, that we experienced that day, where we saw beauty in another person or beauty in our own life. So yeah, I sit down with my family, and it's a no cell phone rule, right? Which is really more on my wife and I. It's really, can I be honest? It's me, right? Like I'm getting texts from this and calls and that and that.
Sure.
So like it gives me permission. Like by making that role, it gives me permission to set it aside and focus on the things that matter.
And in
Yeah.
all the years of setting the phone aside, have you ever picked up the phone after and go, "Oh, shit. I wish I had my phone. Like, I wish I needed that."
No,
Yeah, right?
no, no, no. In fact, quite the opposite. There's been poor moments where I've broken that rule and then realized that I'm not going to get like I was looking down and maybe it's in the yard playing or whatever, and I missed the moment. I missed the
Yes.
moment. And
Yes.
I don't get it back. And so I try to remind myself that, like, I'm 42. We're gonna have another one in October. The gift of being an older father, right? They call my wife. Do you know how mean this is? They call my wife's pregnancy a geriatric pregnancy.
Yes,
I'm like,
I know
I'm
that.
like, she's smoking hot. Like my wife smoke. I'm like, what are you doing?
Anything over 35 is geriatric.
They're treating her.
Again, rules made that was
Yeah, I'm like, whoever
labeled by a
made that.
man.
Yeah, like whoever named that.
No woman named that. No way.
No, no way. And like my wife's doctor is female. And I'm thinking, you you got it. I don't care what the textbook calls it. You gotta figure that out
Can we just
quickly.
introduce advanced maternal age if you must?
That's even I mean,
Very
like I mean, that's it's like you're smacking me with just the other side of the hand on that one. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not good either way. Like that's such crap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, like that, like we know men biologically have an impact on infant health, right?
Yes.
Like, they're not looking at me going, well, I mean, your husband's super old. He probably is going to jack up this baby's health. They're all looking at mom. And I'm like,
Yep.
hey, hey,
Yep. Welcome to
I could have messed this up
welcome to
too.
being a woman.
Yeah, gosh. Yeah. No, it's a, I look at my two daughters and I think of the world as it is today. And man, oh man, do I hope that women with your voice and, are changing, just keep banging on the ceiling and
Well, I will say you can look at your daughters all you want, but you need to look at your son too,
oh
because it's
no,
your son who's gonna be the one who opens the
100%,
door.
100%,
The door
100%.
opens from the inside at the top level, it turns out, so
Yeah, yeah. So it was an interesting, and thank you for calling me on that. So I'll share a story with you that was a really powerful one. I think so much of the the gender biases in our society comes from how men speak to their sons.
Yes.
Like and I don't want to say 100% of it, right? There's definitely some of the expectations. Like my mom tells me not to be a wuss the other day. Like that's not helping, right? At
Mm.
42 years old, like can we put down the drum? It's okay for
Yes.
men to be vulnerable, right? It's
It's
okay for me to be weak.
preferred.
Yeah, come on, like it's all right. Like,
Yeah.
but 100%. One of the things that I thought about, and I've had this. I got to tell you this. I want to get your. So my daughter plays softball. She's like she just started, and she's ridiculous. Like she like she's got an 800 batting average. She doesn't miss.
Wow.
She's ridiculous. Not like dad's counting, but I am quietly, secretly. And so I had this. So one of the things that bothers me like a ton, is the phrase "throws like a girl."
Mm.
It just makes me like my skin crawl, right? As though like women like mechanically and biologically can't throw well. And if you've never watched women play softball at a collegiate level, like turn it on. It's nuts. Like they're incredible athletes, right? Even
Yeah.
at a high school level, it's ridiculous, right? And so I had this vision because we've got the Olympics coming this summer, right? And I
Mhm.
want Nike. I hope if Nike hears this, take it. I don't care. Just maybe put a little star. Where I want a father and a son watching the Olympic softball team together this summer, right?
Yes.
And they're watching it together. And the dad looks at his son and says, "Don't worry, someday you'll throw like a girl too."
I love it.
Right?
What's that Mia Hamm quote where it's like, my coach told me I ran like a girl, and I told him if he ran a little faster, he could too." I
Yes,
was like,
yes,
"Yes, that's it."
yes, yes, yes. Yeah, I agree with you. It starts with dads. It
Yes.
starts with recognizing that to be feminine is to be powerful.
Yes.
And to be like redefining, like the old snips and snails and puppy dog tails and that whole garbage,
Mhm.
right? It's allowing, I don't see redefining, it's permitting women, it's creating the space to allow women to be what they are to begin with,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
I'm definitely made of snips and snails and puppy dog tails. I'm fine with that. I teach your daughters to
Yeah,
be bossy. Teach them to be
yeah,
know-it-alls. Teach them to be
yeah,
loud. Absolutely. Don't like,
absolutely.
I mean, it took me years to discipline myself when I see a little girl not to say, "Oh, your dress is so pretty," because
Yeah, no.
that's what I grew up being told. That's what I grew up was told was like the gold star, the metric, and it is so invasive, right? We don't even it's like a cancer. You don't even realize it's there, and all of a sudden it's like, boom, stage 4. Like you're just
Oh, it's ridiculous.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
no,
tough.
it's terrible, and you see it in every piece of media. Like, so we don't like our kids watch traditional media because it's so the gender norms are so thrown
Yes.
down your throat in such invasive ways that, and even in advertising, it's so the subordinate wife and all this garbage. It's just nuts, right?
Mhm.
And it bothers me to no end. And so, we're playing softball in the yard last night, and my daughter goes diving across the yard to make this dive, right? So one, I have two rules: have fun and play your hardest. That's it, right? And so we're playing, and I tell her like you play like you practice, and she just goes diving for a grounder, catches it, gets up, perfect strike on me like it's nothing, right? Like she's been playing softball for years, so she's got mud all over. And I look at her, I said, "Hey, look," I said, "You're a kid, right? If you get in the bath clean, we didn't do the day right, right?
I love
We didn't
that.
do the day right, you know." And I know a generation ago where they're like, "Oh no, my daughter's dirty," right?
Yeah.
Like I got these beautiful photos of her digging up worms and playing with them and all this stuff and bugs and so we do our best, right? Now she's got first communion on Saturday and my wife's got the whole dress thing, but that's okay too.
Right.
That's being feminine too, if that's the way she wants to express and feel good. And, but I see the beauty in her muddy, dirty, nasty, grimy going after the ball is actually, I think it's a book you would enjoy. It's Not All Princesses Wear Pink.
Yeah.
It's a kid's book. It's one that you might look up and, as loved ones and cared ones and, start having daughters. It's one we've read to our kids forever.
Oh, yeah, that's my gift of choice. Whenever I have friends who have babies, I send them a collection of our favorite books growing up, and they are traditional books and they are non-traditional books, and I just I love that. I'm sitting here in front of you today in a silk top and wearing makeup and earrings and hair blown, but before that, I was moving iron around our home gym. Like, I
Yeah.
think that there are so many ways to be feminine, and I'm so glad that girls are growing up today with Megan Rapinoe and Serena
Yes.
Williams and,
Yes.
Jill Biden and Michelle Obama and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and just so many different models, Malala, Greta Thunberg. There's so many different models of how you can be female, right? And I think one of
Yes.
the most beautiful things about women is that we have all of these nuances within us, and I'm excited for men to catch up and realize that they do too. So, okay, so we talked about forgiveness, we talked about agency. Let's talk about discipline in the
Yes.
last 10 minutes that we have. So, you're an endurance athlete. You and
Yes.
I met during an endurance
Yes, we
athletic
did.
event, right? 29029, which is climbing the same mountain 17 times until you get to 29,029 feet, the height of Everest. Insane, completely ridiculous. And one of those things that it is I'd never done I had done some marathons, but I'd never done a true, like, endurance sport, like the ultra marathon, the, like, all day kind of thing until I did this, and I have to say I drove from my home in Boston up to, Mount Stratton in Vermont, where it is, just a few hour drive, and the whole drive up, I was like, "This is so stupid." I have friends that actually climbed real Everest, and now I'm gonna do this thing called Everesting. I mean, is this like a kind of a boondoggle for, like, wealthy people? This is just I can't even tell. I didn't even post on social media I was doing because I just like, "This is so stupid." And then I got into it, and I was like, "Oh, this isn't an athletic event. This is a math problem." And it's a discipline problem. It's a fuel problem. Okay, I completely underestimated what this thing is. And so talk to us about the role of discipline in the endurance sport that you do and sort of how that manifests itself in other parts and in your life outside of sport.
Yeah, yeah. So my most recent was I did a 50-mile ultra marathon last October. So I ran 50 consecutive miles in 10 hours. And had the unfortunate experience and the fortunate experience of it having to do it virtually. So they shut down
Yes.
the race. So um and while the bars were open in where the race was being held, the outdoor run was so but
Oh
you
my
know,
god.
yeah, no, like, what
Forgiveness,
have you.
forgiveness.
Yeah, right, 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 right. So I ran 50 miles and the journey to get there, in getting ready for 29029, I miscalculated and thought something differently and ran 2 ultra marathons in preparation for that thing. So I ran 2 50Ks. So I was way over physically prepared for what that was gonna ask of me. Like my last descent, I ran part of it. I finished I was well overtrained, which is fine. I rather that.
Sure,
I
of
prefer
course.
that environment. But so here's what is really the gift I've learned. And you only learn this by going through it. So, and I'll tell two things I've learned. The first one is that everybody's looking for freedom, right? That's the word that people want. I want freedom of choice, freedom of blah blah blah, right? I want
Mhm,
freedom, right?
mhm.
People sing songs about freedom, right? There's some great songs about freedom. Nobody's singing songs about discipline. Well, if you want freedom in your life, you gotta have discipline. It's the
Right,
only way it comes,
right.
right? The more disciplined you are, the more free you are. It is just, and I know that sounds insane to say that, but life is a paradox. It is. And so the gift that we understand through discipline. So, and the misnomer for a lot of people, my husband's like, "But you just love running." I'm like, "No, there's days I hate running. I absolutely hate running. I hurt, my body hurts." So last summer I went vegan, fully plant-based vegan. I don't drink alcohol. Obviously, I don't smoke. That would be a pretty bad idea to interface with. Like, that's
Yeah.
not, you know, I'm sure people do it, but that's just not gonna am. So I don't eat meat. I don't eat dairy. I don't eat any animal products. I eat a enormous amount of vegetables. And then I don't drink alcohol. I focus on sleep a ton. I mean, you saw all these things I do. I'm very focused on my mental strength. So I have just an enormous amount of mantras I utilize to get me through the day some days. I have tough days. I've got music that helps me through. I could take way more than 10 minutes to share this. But the most powerful thing is my wife looked at me and she said to me, she goes, "You're inspiring." I go, "What the hell are you talking about? What are you talking about?" She goes, "You're inspiring. Just the way you jump out of bed, 5 o'clock in the morning, you go run and all this." And I'm like, I was like, Wait a minute. Do you think I just jump out of bed?" She goes, "Yeah, you get up." And I said, "Oh no." like, there is a lot like, there is a lot of shit being talked to my head, a lot.
Mm,
I don't know the way to say that. I don't curse, but I don't know have another word for that. But there is a tremendous battle happening inside my brain. And the difference between what I get done and what I used to get done is the willingness to not lose that fight. Is that I won't let myself down for the commitment that I've made to me because I care about how I feel tomorrow versus how I feel today. I'm willing to work through the hardest moments. And so when I reflect on my life in that moment, feel gratitude, feel proud, feel humbled, and that I'm not going to show up differently than what I want. Like, am I being the kind of father, the kind of husband the kind of man I'd want my daughters, if assuming they're straight, would want to marry? Like, would I welcome somebody who's living like me into my own home to be part of my family? And so in those difficult moments, in those moments I want to quit, I have bigger questions I ask myself. You see, the discipline doesn't come from anything other than knowing your values and knowing what you stand for. In those moments of difficulty, not being willing to back down on the things that you say you are. It's not that it makes, and that's not my life's easy. It's not like those things are easy. I just got a different set of tools.
yeah, yeah. I think I'm not quite nearly as evolved as you. I can be super disciplined if I've got someone else doing it with me, right? Like I will break a promise to myself every day of the week. I will find excuses. I will get lazy. I'll surf social media, whatever it is. But if I promise someone else that I'm going to show up at 4 a.m. at the Harvard Stadium, I'm going to show up at 3:58 at the Harvard Stadium, right? Like that's just how I work. So even even in the pandemic, I've had to have like virtual promises with people like, you're going to work out, I'm going to work out, we're going to report back after, but that sort of thing. But to be able to do it, the first time I ran a marathon, as you know, you run 20 miles in training. You don't run the full
No.
26.2, you run 20. And the first time I ran the Boston Marathon, I got to the top of Heartbreak Hill, which is about mile 21. And I remember thinking, I wonder what happens now. I just I was like, "I don't know what happens. Am I going to die? Am I going to finish?" And there's like a voice inside of your head that says, "You're an idiot. This is hard. Every part of you hurts. You should just stop. You're
Yes.
gonna die out here. What were you
Yes.
thinking? You're not a
Yes.
marathoner." And then there's another voice inside of your head that says, "You're gonna do it." Like, walk, run, crawl, cartwheel over the finish. It doesn't matter. You're gonna finish this race and you're going to stand there while some random stranger puts a medal around your neck and wraps a heat sheet around your shoulders like you're a freaking superhero, and you will forevermore be known as a marathoner. You
Yes.
can do it. And you spend miles with one voice talking and the other voice talking, and only one of those voices gets to win. And you
Yes.
have to decide. And if it were just me out there alone without anybody knowing I were doing it, I might quit. But the fact that I knew that there were people watching me and waiting who had donated money, who were gonna be there at the finish, who were, like, tracking me on social media, or that's why I did it. So to do 50 miles alone, I mean, that's a whole other level of discipline.
I don't know. I don't know about that. Here's what here's what I'll share with you though, and I want to be mindful. I know you said we're coming up on the time. I lose track in talking to you, which is such a gift. Deep talk. I like the day could go doing this. Is big talk. Is here's the thing. Is I have those moments too. I thought about quitting at mile 32. Yeah, it was about mile 32, mile 34 in the 50 miler. Right. So I stepped in my facilities in my house and I'm sitting there, and I'm going, I don't know if I got anything left. I don't know. Right. I never ran more than 33 at that point. And I later found out I had a torn plantar fascia that I was running this thing with. So I heard to say I was in a lot of pain would be a tremendous understatement. I currently have a boot on my foot.
Mm,
Um, but what I recognized is, and I said to myself, is that I will, no, and I didn't put much on social media about this, hadn't shared it much other than on the podcast. I said, but I'm gonna know. And the
yes.
truth is that here's what I'll just is that you gotta love yourself enough to recognize that the hardest thing in life often is it letting yourself down? And so to me, we didn't talk about the being religious, but to me, this is hell. This is why, because I don't believe in a physical location in hell. This is hell. Is that I'm 90, I'm 95, and this whole journey is over, right? I'm physically incapable any longer whenever that shows up for me. And I look back at the life I lived and I recognize how much more I had to give and didn't. That's
Yes.
hell. And I think that often regret comes from letting ourselves down. So for me in those moments, the way discipline comes from is I can project very easily. I don't know where this comes from, what I want my life to be, how I want to experience this journey, and to go, I'm not going to do that to myself because I've made some stupid, stupid, stupid decisions. And I sit in that now sometimes of decisions I made in the past and where I gave up on myself, where I let myself down, or I didn't show up authentically, or I didn't treat somebody the way that I'm designed to treat others. And I have a lot of regret in that.
Yeah.
And I'm not willing to do that to myself any longer.
Gosh, that hits home so much. As you know, I'm a competitive rower, and a couple years ago we were at Masters Nationals, and I was in a boat with some people who they just, I don't know, they didn't train as hard. They weren't watching their nutrition as much. They'd like had a couple beers the night before. Like they were just there to have fun. And I thought we were a competitive team, which meant we were there to compete. And we rode this race. We rode as hard as we possibly could, and we came in second, and not by much. And we got out of the boat, and I remember one of the women going, "Well, that was fun." And I
Mm,
remember thinking, "You know, it would be more fun than second, first." Right? Because
yes.
I wasn't upset that we didn't win. I was upset that we actively lost, that we didn't do all the things that we were capable of
Yes.
doing to win. Like, if we had shown up, I'm not saying, like, do the 5th hour of workout, or, like, I'm not saying, like, go crazy, but, like, there's a bare minimum of what you need to do to show up at your very best. Like, our boat didn't even do that, and I was so pissed that we lost. I wasn't pissed we didn't win. I was pissed that we lost, and I was pissed that that was on us. So I totally hear what you're saying about looking back in life. I think about that all the time. Like, I wish I would have taken better care of my teeth when I was younger, my skin when I was younger, all the things I can't undo. And yet I still, when I get, all of my feelings, eat a bag of jelly beans. Well, like, what's that going to do for my, development of cancer later on? I'm going to look back and be like, I wish I didn't eat those jelly beans. And it's like, we can't sometimes we can't stop ourselves because the thing that we want to do just we're like drawn by our emotions in those moments. So that's a good framing of like, how will I feel looking back on this? Is this the person I wanted to be?
Yeah. And there's times to eat the jelly beans.
Yeah.
There
Yes.
just are, right?
Yes.
Like, I would call myself vegan-ish, right? As in, like, I have never found good tasting vegan ice cream. It just
Yes.
doesn't exist. If somebody
Mm,
can invent it, DM me, send me a link. I'd love to try it, but it doesn't exist, right? I let myself eat the ice cream from time to time in life, right? I do, right? Because 'Cause I'm a human at the end of
yes.
the day, right? So, the difference is that we don't have to be perfect in all of these things. It's we have to be intentional. We have to be on purpose, right? And there's a big difference, right? So how do you show up in those moments? I told Lauren when I got ready to run the 50, my wife, I said, here, there are two potential outcomes. I'm going to finish this, or you're going to drive, or I'm going to leave this path in an ambulance. And I just need you to be okay calling 911.
I mean, that was that former Navy SEAL that talked to us for 29 or 29. He's like, there's
Yeah.
two possible outcomes. You finish or you break your body doing it. We were
Yeah.
like, okay.
Yeah. And I'm
I guess
willing.
that's what we're
I'm
doing.
cool. I am cool with that, right? Because I know I'll heal, right?
Yes.
Now, that may be a little much for some. That might be a little much for some, but we all have to have our thing. Like, what are you willing to go in all for? Like, so often the reason you people are not getting where they want to go in life because they won't go all in. They hold back. They reserve something. They stand miles and miles back. And so much of that comes from the fact that you don't know actually who you are. You don't know who you are authentically. You don't know what you stand for. And so when that moment of difficulty shows up, you don't embrace it because you don't know what you authentically stand for. And so one of the things I know about myself authentically is that I rise when things get hard.
Mm, mhm.
That's just who I am, right? And I say that to myself, like when things get hard, I get stuck. And I've defined myself as that. I share that mantra when I go through difficult moments, and I'm okay with that. I embrace the suck of life. Like I don't know what people, because here's what I've learned is that the greatest moments of my life, my greatest connections in humans, my greatest connections to our divinity, my greatest connections to my humanity have come from the hardest things I've ever gone through.
Yeah.
And once you realize that you learn more about who you are and you learn about what you're made of in those moments, I finished the run because I knew that all the wisdom was going to come from those final miles. And I didn't want to give that up. I trained for 6 months for that one moment. And I wasn't going to give up the wisdom. I wanted to know what I was going to learn. So I went and ran them.
Yeah. Yeah. My friend Jackie Summers says that crisis doesn't change you, it reveals you. And I
Yes.
think that that is so absolutely true. I mean, I am like you. Like when things get hard, I show up. That's when I show up. I'm actually not as good on the day to day when everything's copacetic and fine. Like those are the days I get complacent. But when things go down, oh man, you want me? I am the friend you want in the foxhole. I am the person you want. I'm the trainer in the corner. Like I am. Like that is when that's my finest hour.
Yeah.
Crisis is like last March and April when we like locked down and like put together, the house and everything that we had to do. Like I was all in. August, September, October, November. It wasn't that I got bored. It wasn't that I was languishing. I was just like, whatever. This isn't a crisis. Like we know how to handle this. It's fine. It's boring. It's not interesting to me. Like the crisis is interesting. Kyle, this is fantastic. Like I said, when I could talk to you forever. I try to keep these to an hour though for people who are listening. So, if people want to find you, if they want to hear more of your incredible wisdom and how to live life on purpose, tell people where they can find you.
Yeah, I'd say our most active social media platform is Instagram, which is just Legacy on Purpose. They can find us literally anywhere you can find a podcast. Legacy on Purpose is the name of the podcast as well. We interview amazing guests like Laura Gassner. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's incredible. So you can hear her previous episodes. So, but yeah, we're honored. We have some amazing people sharing wisdom beyond just me. So it's not me just expounding on what I believe, but we bring people in who are living bold and courageous lives like you are, Laura. So, so Instagram is probably our best contact, and then legacyonpurposepodcast.com is our website.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for showing up here today and helping us learn how to live our legacy on purpose.
Thank you.